just want to welcome everybody to this session. And this session will be done by Shona Dianikwe, I hope I got that right. And she is the current acting head for General Studies Division at the Samuel Jackman Prescott Institute of Technology. Now she has years experience in TVET, small business management, and the entrepreneurship and finance. She's a trained teacher and she holds an MBA from the University of Bedfordshire, I hope I pronounced that correct. And she has a BSc in management, and she has a diploma in leadership also. So, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Ms. Shona.
I'll fill the room.
Hi, good afternoon.
Afternoon.
We're looking at how we in Barbados, this is a Barbadian case study, but for most of the Caribbean countries, we share similar characteristics, and how we are going to look at reframing and reforming technical and vocational education given the new dictates of industry. And we know that governments the world over have pronounced the importance of technical and vocational education and training in the social and economic development of nations and people. But in the Caribbean, despite our local scenarios of increased youth unemployment, greater demand for skilled workers, rapid technological and organizational changes, we seem a little hesitant with respect to acknowledging the true contribution that technical and vocational education can make to our Caribbean economies. Traditionally, Caribbean economies and technical and vocational education was seen as teaching people specific skills for specific professions. However, with globalization and rapid technological changes, we have realized that given these inevitabilities, we need to change the way in which we perceive technical and vocational education. So when we look at where we are, Hutton and Dixon, what they said is that the emphasis needs to be placed on looking towards the knowledge-based economies. However, when we compare this to where we are, we're saying that, for example, in Barbados, our unemployment rate is high and youth unemployment rate is even higher. We also have a situation where we need greater skills, rapid technological and organizational changes. For example, in the Caribbean, what we realize is that our economies are operating in a very hostile economic environment. 2019 ILO report indicated that from this year, we're going to have a deficit of about 500,000 professionals needed in the digital technological industry. And the United Nations predicts that 2/3 of the jobs in developing worlds will be automated, which is going to threaten employability. CXC, for example, the statistics show that 90% of Caribbean students that cannot pass 5 CXC subjects at one sitting, and only 8% of any one group, they pass more than 5 subjects. So for a region facing this dilemma, the question has to be asked whether we are adequately preparing students for these inevitabilities. Now, technical and vocational education, in many instances, when we look at the Barbadian context, have these characteristics. So we have the compartmentalization of technical and vocational education, where it is viewed as a non-college option, it is viewed as the weakest link. We also have where we see that technical and vocational education we have to look at the gentrification of academic education. It leads to negative perception of TVET. We have these negative perceptions being perpetuated not only by students but by their parents, and there's limited investment in technical and vocational education, which may contribute to uncompetitive programs, ill-aligned curricula, and a significant skills gap, which is currently being experienced in Barbados and throughout the Caribbean. So when we look at the research findings, what I did is that I used qualitative research interviews to gather the information. I looked at not only the institutions, the technical institutions, but I interviewed persons from the Ministry of Labor that would have done the survey, and I seek to look at that survey and to compare it to what the information that was coming out of the institutions. I also interviewed persons from the TVET Council in Barbados, as well as the Barbados Employees Confederation, because we obviously need to have industry's input. So when we look at the survey covered 4 industries: cultural industry, international business, manufacturing, and the tourism industry. And therefore, what the research ought to do is to address the perception that students' unpreparedness for industry and the emergence of a skill gap in industry was implicit of a disconnect between institutional objectives and industry dictates. And my research also sought to investigate whether training institutions and affiliated government agencies were equipping students with the tools enabling competency in industry. So when we look at the industry concerns, we saw that some of the concerns were parity of esteem, shortage of qualified workers, lack of equivalence of technical qualification, the absence of well-established national qualification systems, need for qualified training, and a truncated system. So when we look at the parity of esteem, for example, it has a lot of implications. So Sainsbury, who is the Chancellor of Cambridge University, said that there are 3 components to parity of esteem. First, we look at a national qualification system. You need a good national qualification system. You need qualified teachers with modernized equipment, and there should be a sharing between the training costs, where industry and the institutions also share this training costs. So when we look first at the national qualification system, CVQs in Barbados are not understood by industry. They're there, but industry claims that they don't really understand the equivalence of CVQs. We have them on a national qualification framework, but it still needs to be explained. Secondly, qualified teachers, and therefore it's a difficulty attracting qualified teachers. Especially for the TVET system, where they see industry as being more attractive and obviously being more lucrative with respect to remuneration. We also find, when we look at the qualification, is that there is a disparity with respect to pay. For example, in Barbados, the Barbados Community College is the academic college, and my institution, the Samuel Jackman Prescott Institute of Technology, is a technical college, and there's a severe disparity with respect to pay of the educators at these 2 systems. So we also look at sharing the costs, and therefore there's an inactive relationship between industry and institutions, and that also is a result of policy, because institutions cannot actively go out there and solicit industry investment. And therefore, there's also a lack of incentive given the economic times that we are currently in, where industry is not being incentivized to invest in technical education, despite the fact that they're saying that there's a skills gap and all of these different things. So when we look at some of the information, what we are seeing is that in industry, the worth of technical education is recognized if there's a clear equivalence to academic qualification. And therefore the feedback shows that when we look at this slide, only 8%, if you look at the one down there, employees with NVQs, CVQs, only 8%, and this is students that have recently been hired within the last 2 years. And therefore only 8% of employees within, for example, the manufacturing sector, which is the gray bar, have NVQs or CVQs. You also look at the SJPI, my institution, and you see that the SJPI and the BVTB, which are the 2 technical institutions, these fall behind the secondary school, even BCC, which is an academic and university, with respect to all of the higher within all of the industries. And therefore, as educators, we need to ask ourselves, why is this? Okay? Industry views technical and vocational education as truncated and there is an urgent need to build out the system. So at present, the majority of CVQs are offered at level 1 and 2, and therefore this is below associate degree and degree levels. So this curtails the level of qualification of that the industry really wants. So when we look at this system, what we're seeing is when we look at the employment practices, if you look at the top 3 institutional hires, we're seeing that even for the manufacturing industry, where we assume most of our graduates will come from because of a technical nature, we see that you have the university is the first pick, the secondary schools is the second, and the SJP is the third. Even the secondary schools are preferred above the technical institutions. You also have in the tourism industry, where at the technical institutions we will do catering and all of those other areas for the tourism industry. We're seeing that the UWI secondary school and BCC has a culinary program, and within tourism, BCC is seen as not a preferred pick. So as institutions, we have to find out why this is the case. For example, when we go to, they have a problem with finding qualified candidates in Barbados. We look at the manufacturing industry, we see that 28% in the manufacturing sector, 28% of respondents indicated difficulty in finding qualified candidates within the past 2 years. This shortage of collaboration by representatives from this has been collaborated because when I spoke to persons from the Barbados Employers Confederation that represent persons within the employers within the industry, they're saying that they've verified that there's a shortage. And one of the things that we have realized is that there's a shortage with respect to electrical and mechanical engineers. With respect to photovoltaic, in the photovoltaic industry, there are also shortages. And what is happening is that we find, if we look at this, that in the manufacturing sector, you have 15% of the respondents saying that they fill vacancies with work permits. So what does this mean? Individuals are coming from outside and they're filling these positions within these lucrative sectors. So Maurice, when we look at this information, it is alarming, because what we're seeing is that our training programs inadequate when it comes to industry needs. If we are not preferred, and if you are filling these vacancies with outside persons, what are our training needs? What are the training needs? So Maurice 2010 reinforces the point that training for modern economies require a solid bridge between the training institutions and industry. And he contends that schools cannot provide the environment required, and enterprises are unable to provide the full range of theoretical preparation which the new technological demands dictate. Therefore, the bridge between training and work must be established. And this relationship was also fostered when we're looking at research, because we need all of the partners to actually work together. The survey confirms what institutional leaders confirmed to me, that there was a failure on the part of industry to form meaningful partnerships and meaningful collaborations with the technical and vocational institutions. Now, this scenario becomes even more concerning when industry speaks of the skill gap. Yet we're seeing, based on this slide, that they're doing little to nothing to narrow the gap. So for example, what we're seeing is that when we look at current involvement, we're seeing that there's little involvement in industry when we're looking at collaboration with the institutions with respect to demonstrating new technologies to instructors. There's little involvement with respect to participating in curriculum and advisory committees. And there's even less involvement when we're looking at participating in career fairs, job fairs, and even in internships. So if they're complaining of these problems, we're saying that collaboration is important, but it seems as if they are not even facilitating that collaboration. So one of the things the personnel from the Barbados Employer Confederation suggested is that the lack of collaboration was not deliberate, but it was a consequence of current economic and financial constraints and the fact that we have a lean employee complement in most businesses, and therefore this might have been the result. But we have some successes, because in Barbados in 2012, there was the launch of the Skills for the Future program, which was an initiative, which was a collaboration between the IDB, Inter-Development Bank, and our TVET Council. And this saw where this program trained a number of persons. The disadvantage of this for institutions is that it was for the workforce. So institutions partnered with industry to train industry workers. Yes, the institutions got equipment, but that initial training was for the workers, okay? And it wasn't for students. But however, there was a disbursement of about $60 million in the economy, and there was also the establishment of 25 new programs. So when we're looking at this, we're saying there's some gains, but those gains are not necessarily all directed towards institutional strengthening and development. Now, institutions had concerns. So this is some of the skills for the future. Where at my institution, we saw the development of photovoltaic program. We saw also 3D modeling, live sound engineering, and fiber optic. And at the Barbados Community College, there was the industrial mechatronics and computer based systems with respect to the cars. Now, when we look at the institutional concerns, these were the concerns from the institution. There's a concern that, for example, one of the major concerns is the level of duplication. We have, in many instances, training institutions like SJPI and BCC are often competing for the same students. And because you're competing for the same students, you're competing for similar resources. We have currently all 21 secondary schools in Barbados. They offer CVQs, and post-secondary institutions, technical institutions like the Samuel Jackman Prescott Institute of Technology, all of these offer level 1 and 2 CVQs. So we're doing the same thing. We realized that in many instances that the number of sixth forms in Barbados moved from 7 in 2008 to 11 in 2018. And because of the gentrification of academic education, people see going to sixth forms as more lucrative than coming to a technical institution. So one of the things, some of the other concerns is a lack of training opportunities for staff at technical institutions, increased number of sixth forms, I spoke about that, no clear matriculation process. For example, students moving from technical institutions, and if they want to go into academic institutions, sometimes they have to do over courses, and this wastes resources and time and all of those particular type of things. There's when we also look at the other issues, we talk about the archaic policies. So for example, policies that in many instances, we need policies to increase the level of autonomy that technical and vocational institutions have. Policies that allow for the delivery of higher qualifications. At present, the policy under which technical institutions like the SJPA has been set up, we are not allowed to offer degrees and associate degrees, and we are not allowed to offer internships. So if we wanted to do those things, what we will have to do is that you have to go back to Parliament to have that facilitated, and therefore that becomes an issue. There's also a lack of investment, and therefore businesses should also be incentivized to offer by offering them subventions, so that they see investing in technical and vocational education as not only important, but in there is lucrative. So those are the things that we are looking at. At present, NVQs and CVQs are part of the qualification framework in Barbados. However, as I said before, it is not well understood. So there needs to be greater communication with respect to industry about the equivalence with respect to those qualifications. We have another problem where, as I taught you, we have the institutional cannibalism, that is my term. And what we're seeing is that because of duplication, because of the increase in the number of sixth forms, because there's no clear matriculation process, multiple institutions are fighting for the same section of the market. And therefore, there's no need for this. Because, for example, many Caribbean countries, they claim to follow the Singapore model. And when we look at the Singapore model it is a tier system. And therefore, not that there's not the tier system in Barbados, but it's not being used in the way that it can prevent this level of institutional cannibalism. So in Guyana, for example, with the pending oil boom, the labor market is severely ill-equipped for this boom. We are seeing where, for example, in Guyana, there's a problem with respect to attracting even trainers because of the low pay. In Barbados, with the target, we have a target of 100%. We have a target of 100% green vehicles by 2030. However, we have the situation where there's no infrastructure to support this lofty goal. So we don't have the capacity where schools are looking at being able to work on hybrid vehicles or electronic vehicles. We don't have that infrastructure. So capacity building is important, and this could come in the form of establishing sector councils. And when we look at sector councils, what sector councils are these are independent employee-led organizations designed to build a skill system driven by employer demand, which will hopefully reduce the skills gap. So when we look at these are some of the concerns that I spoke about: lack of investment, limited training opportunities, outdated equipment, policy, legislation. So how do we reframe and reform? And therefore, this is my solution. And therefore, we need to have an inclusive approach to reframing and reforming. And it's like a honeycomb where all of the components need to actually work together. So first, we need the policy structure to be changed. So we need the legislation to be changed, which is critical. And not only the legislation, but we need the mindset of government to change, where, for example, like in Singapore, it is critical that economic planning means that there's a link between the educational outcome and the economy. So if you're moving towards 100% electronic vehicles by 2030, what we're seeing is that you have to put the infrastructure in first. So education, training before you do that. In Guyana, the same way, but in the Caribbean, we tend to work the opposite way around. We need investment, where private and public sector, and we talk about the sector skill councils. We need a proper governance system where we need equity and inclusiveness in the system. TVET cannot be seen as the also-ran. It cannot be seen as the weakest link. We need to look at leadership within the institutions, greater level of autonomy, focusing on TVET, and therefore education today needs to be seen as an economic good and not as a social good. So, for example, most of the educational institutions, including TVET, they don't do marketing. And therefore, it is a well-kept secret about what is done in these institutions. And therefore, there needs to be greater marketing opportunities. And we need, as an institution, to be able to go out there and actively solicit investment from industries. We also need expertise, training of staff to operate at increased levels of proficiency in the private and the public sector, private and public sector facilitated, because government cannot do all. We also need capacity, with greater capability and capacity, where we look at the implementation of those sector skills, which are led by the employees, and
one of the things that we're looking at is that before we're saying that, education and industry tend to be compartmentalized and therefore you need to work closer together. We also are looking at a system whereby, as I said, the policy framework needs to change. So we're offering subventions to industry to assist in training, revision of the mandate of technical institutions. We're looking at linking economic development to the building of educational and technical capacity. And really and truly, that should be the other way. We are going to link economic development because we are going to build the capacity first. We're looking at research. One of the things with respect to technical and vocational institutions is that a lot of research is not done, especially from a Caribbean perspective, about what technical and vocational education can do and how it can increase economic development. And therefore, this needs to be more tangible. We need to be able to see it. You need to work with the Ministry of Labor. The Ministry of Labor has been doing surveys for a number of years, but one of the problems is that the institutions are not using the survey to help in planning. So if you look at the information from my research, what I found is that when I did the interviews and when I did the research, it really collaborated what the Ministry of Labor survey said. You understand? So we need to use those surveys. You also look at education as an economic good, where you need to increase marketing, seek investment opportunities. We need to have more competitive curricula, and therefore we need to have curriculum reform. And many of our curriculum are they're static, and therefore a curricula has to be a dynamic piece of a body of information where you're changing as quickly as the industry changes, because you're not going to be competitive if you're teaching students information that is outdated. We also need to have opportunities for scholarships, and this is one of my pet peeves, where in Barbados the national scholarships are only offered to persons in sixth form or persons in the academic institutions like the Barbados Community College. And therefore, we need to have scholarships being offered to technical institutions as well. So we need to be part of that scholarship framework. And finally, we need more synergistic relationships, as I said before. Sector councils, advisory committees, companies sponsoring programs, and more mutually beneficial investment opportunities. So these are the things that from the research I found. So in conclusion, the wheels with respect to progress of reform in technical and vocational education today, they're moving too slowly. Industry standards have far surpassed institutional capabilities, and institutions need to be able to play catch up. When training and national development is unsynchronized, the economy will ultimately suffer. The country, in many instances, will run the risk of becoming uncompetitive and unattractive to foreign direct investment. And therefore, when we're looking at these things, this is a posture that we can ill afford in these turbulent economic times. Our role as TVET educators and administrators is to create a 21st century TVET system which is re-engineered, restructured, and reorganized in such a way that it gives us a new vision and a new mandate for education. Thank you.
Okay, don't want to break for too long, but we're going to go in the questioning section right now. So just before you ask a question, just please state your name along with your organization, please.
Paul Cochran, Workforce Opportunities and Residency, Cayman Islands. Thank you for a very detailed presentation. One of the things that struck my attention when you presented, you noted that secondary schools were being more attractive than even the technical schools. From your interviews and from your interactions, what possibly is the reason? Because when I think about it, I'm thinking that secondary schools may be less prepared than those who would have completed maybe second and gone on to the technical. So it's quite interesting.
Especially in the manufacturing industry, it is pay. Where, for example, an individual coming from the Samajama and Prescott Institute of Technology, because you not only have the CVQ, but you have you have a diploma in electrical engineering, in plumbing, in whatever, the pay is going to have to be higher. So if you're having a secondary school student that have the CXC and that might be introduced to the CVQ with respect to electrical engineering, because these courses now are offered in the secondary school, you're going to pay that individual less than you're going to pay a SPA graduate. And not only that, again, secondary schools now have the 6 forms. So we have a cultural thing where when we look at the 6 forms, we're saying that because it's a 6 form and because it tends to be more academic, therefore you look at that graduate as offering more than a graduate at a technical institution, which in most cases is erroneous, which is not the case. Not all at once. No. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so since there's no other question, we basically just meet and greet and move on to the next session. So if you want to share cards or anything or get contacts, then you can just use 5 minutes to do that.